proceed to the program. Towards the end of the program, there will be a Q&A session and the slides will be shared. And let me introduce you to our speaker, Mr. Rodney Tay. Mr. Rodney Tay has over 28 years of experience driving innovation across top organizations in Singapore and APAC region. He's a founding contributor to Singapore Media Exchange and at Yahoo Southeast Asia. Mr. Rodney oversaw ad operations across Southeast Asia, ensuring flawless execution of high impact campaigns. Rodney is also a Skills Future certified and accredited trainer and curriculum developer passionate about equipping professionals with skills in AI-driven and data-enabled digital advertising and marketing strategies. Over to you, Mr. Rodney.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me loud and clear? If you can you give me a thumbs up? Thank you. Ken, let me start sharing my screen. Hey, can you guys see my screen? If you can, also, if you can, kindly give me a thumbs up. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yes, thank you so much for making tonight's session. I believe last month there was a session actually conducted, and I have a colleague who actually was delivering that session as well. So hopefully tonight would be another insightful session for you, right, with regards to advertising and advertising trends in Singapore. Can I have a quick show of hands of how many in our audience here are actually, what I might call it, new to advertising? Anybody here in this room is new to advertising? If you can, kindly give me a thumbs up so I have an idea. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Relatively small group, all right? Thank you. And I imagine since maybe about 20% of you in this room is I don't know, I imagine that about yes, is about 20% of you in this room is new to advertising. How about the rest? Would the rest of you, would you call yourself in some ways seasoned or experienced? I imagine. Very seasoned from YouTube apps. Thank you very much, Wei Hao. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I tried to make the session as engaging as possible, right? I mean, the idea here is to look at trends specifically, okay? And is also to have an introduction to those who are perhaps new to advertising and would like to find out more, or perhaps would like to explore what other advertising would be available other than the ones that you're familiar with. Yeah? Ken? I do encourage everyone to participate. When I say participate, I mean feel free to throw in questions. Our moderators and our facilitators of tonight's session will also help to take note of the questions, and I will do and endeavor my best to address all your questions. Is that okay? Yeah. I must admit that although being in the industry for quite a while, I still don't necessarily have all the answers. I mean, simply because when we learn to advertise, we don't necessarily look at all aspects and we look at what we are strong in. I think some of you would actually attest to that. So we are here to learn and share from everyone. So I do hope that my experience would be enough for everyone to get excited about, have a little bit of knowledge and insights in terms of what you think you can go beyond what you have known so far. Advertisement is very expensive. Thank you very much, Mark Liu. Advertisement is very expensive. I guess if someone that is new to advertising and haven't had a chance to look at how you would optimize your spends, yes, I must say, because it is no different from you advertising from TV and newspapers, right? For those who are familiar with advertisements in TV and newspapers would also experience the same kind of, how should I say, a high entry cost, if I may say so, right? So I guess that's the beauty about it in some sense, where today advertising is something which, for the uninitiated, it is important that you pay attention to some of the specific tips and tricks that we're going to go through. All right, that's pretty key. And that would help you in many sense look at how you could minimize wastage and help you to, in a way, be more efficacious in how you advertise. Yeah, good. Can. So let's talk a bit for right more about what we have today. So welcome to the future of digital advertising. Digital advertising is no longer just about visibility, all right? It's about creating immersive experience. Now, because of what we have in Singapore, we think we, in many sense, have the luxury of having very good infrastructure, and that enables us to look at how content can be rich and engaging, right? And more so when today we have the ability to leverage on AI, which makes it more compelling for everyone us, all of us in the room. Okay. So we'll explore how Singaporean businesses can thrive in a dynamic landscape, as rightfully some of you has identified. It can be expensive. Rather, what I say is it can be a very expensive lesson if you are jumping in blind and you perhaps don't have any basic idea, foundation, or fundamental understanding of what you need to do before you start plunging into advertising. I think that's something that's pretty key. Yes. Okay. Now, um, as someone as myself who has been in an industry for more than 20 years, I mean, I've had the privilege of actually witnessing and contribute to the evolution of digital advertising, which I feel that, after so many years, it never gets bored, surprisingly, right? And the only thing is actually kind of understanding the industry requires you to be constantly updated with the trends, and then you look at how you impart the knowledge, which I'm doing so from my experience and knowledge, how I can impart those. And some of the fundamentals actually over the past 20 years never really changed. I think that's critical for most people to know, right? So even if you are new or you are um, experienced advertiser, you would agree with me that there are some fundamentals in which you will never detract from. Although with the influx of AI and technology, it only means that all the more you should be extremely precise, right? That's the idea. The word to use is precise, because only with precision, then you would be efficacious in your effort. Because if not, then as in most cases, generically, you would likely to waste a fair bit of money, right, when you're doing advertising without understanding what it means. So I'm excited to share my insights with you for this evening. Good. So before I start jumping in, I'd like to share some important notes, right? Most of this information which I'm about to share are already existing in some aspects, right, in the internet. You can find them. The only difference that I bring forth to the table is to actually kind of add value to insights, if I may say so, right? And yeah, and please feel free to interject with your comments inside the chat. I may not necessarily attend to the questions as you ask, but my colleagues and facilitators of this tonight's webinar would take down those questions and we will address them. Okay. So I want you to take note that the information that I shared is actually meant for educational purposes. None of this information is meant to sell. Okay. And some of this may actually what I might say is they are personal interpretation of social media, my perspective. All right. I mean, because after all, research has been done. So must give credit where credit is due. Research is done. However, with regards to the interpretation, and sometimes I feel that there can be further insights which I can see from my experience on what I think would be most helpful to understand. Okay. The data presented also represents more than 17 different websites, all the information that's been collected. Okay. So, in general, what do we see as trends, right, in the past years? What we can see in Singapore's context and landscape is actually a thriving digital advertising landscape, if I may say so. Why? Because Singapore actually has the luxury of having high internet penetration and smartphone penetration, as high as 96% and 162%. Now, what does that mean? It means that every one of us at least would have one, if not 1.6 devices. Interesting, yeah, right? Digital ad spends has grown tremendously. In fact, $2.34 billion, and that's about 60% of total spends. When I say spends means in terms of all the advertising dollars, it has actually surpassed more than 50% of traditional media. In the past, it used to be the other way around. If I remember vaguely, about maybe 5, 10 years ago, it was maybe hovering around 70-30. 70% will be spent on traditional media, 30% is spent on digital media. Now is the other way around. Now 70%, 60% seems to be spent on digital media, and 40% is spent still on traditional media. Okay. Now, one important thing for us to also consider is social media advertising. I'm going to share a little bit of information. I'm not going to share too much of it, but towards the end, if you guys still hang around, I might share some information. If not, then what I've done is I've attached some additional data for social media advertising, and that's towards the end of the slides. And if you were to stay around, there's a link, right? Do feel free to reach out. We are able to share the link, and you can get a copy of the deck for your own perusal. Okay. And some of the key platforms that I have briefly touched on would be the likes of WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube to begin with. Yeah. So this is an overall view of the digital ad spends. These are based in US dollars, okay, because this was done at a global level by a company that's called Meltwater and We Are Social. It was a joint research that they've done, and it was done on a global level, of which I've actually narrowed down to Singapore, and these are representative of Singapore numbers. So as you can see, overall growth in digital ad spend grew by 10%. And I think you can agree with me, 10% for an industry to grow is actually quite tremendous, right? Even with the fact that you can imagine that the base that we have from a digital ad spend is actually 1 billion. To grow it by 10% to 1.7 billion is actually quite tremendous. And brands actually increase their digital marketing budgets across channels, the likes of search, video, and influencer marketing, right? And of all the digital advertising spend, search actually dominates this, right? I mean, businesses in Singapore spent close to about 600 million. There was a growth of about 13.3%. And of the search, as you know, what was prioritized was actually search engine marketing, right? And Google Ads was followed then. I mean, of course, as always, when it comes to advertising, we all need to be cautious and we need to be aware in terms of what is the ROI that advertising brings to us, right? And therefore, search will be that component. Yep. Yes. For some of you is asking about the 17 websites or where we used these information is attached in the deck. The deck will have an appendix, right, of all the websites that we actually comb through. Ken? Okay, good. Yep. Now, there is also an increasing popularity of digital video ads. As you can see, it is the next in line. It actually grew by 8.6%, pretty modest actually, in a total of $273 million spent, right? It actually grew by 22 million. So as you can see, right, only with luxury of a very established infrastructure as those of Singapore. And as most of you have kind of also understood the idea of how 4G is actually progressing to 5G, or some of you may be using 5G network already, it therefore facilitates the use of video advertising all more so, right? In fact, actually, video fundamentally is just a mobile version or digital version of your TV advertising. And I guess it's still appealing in many sense and ways simply because it actually attracts the consumer. It actually stimulates consumers, right, with regards to the affect and the thinking and the affect ability. So that's why it's still as powerful as before. I mean, simply because I guess with regards to video advertising, if you're not leveraging on tools, which we'll share more later in a while, perhaps it is actually quite a time-consuming and expensive venture. But the reality is, with advertising, it no longer needs to be so, right? And the turnaround time and effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of creating a video ad is no longer as high as before, right? In terms of the entry. Digital banner ads, right, is another consideration. All right. It's actually the total spends is close to about 489 million, of which it grew by about 42 million, close to about 10%, 9.3 to be exact. Okay. And more so, a portion of this is actually attributed to mobile first experiences. Yeah. So again, as I stress upon this, simply because it is important to understand that, as I said, with regards to the internet penetration, and we easily have more than one or more than one and a half devices with us. And that means that it is actually a total experience and multi-platform experience when we actually kind of have surfing and consuming content through the internet. Another portion of seeing the largest growth in terms of advertising spends is actually influencer marketing, right? A quick show of hands, how many of you are on any kind of social media platform and have seen live streaming taking effect? Live streaming selling. Anyone? Quick show of hands. Live streaming. Yes, I see some. Yes. Thank you. Yes. And I can imagine that you can also appreciate for those who are actually having e-commerce stores, right? And those who are selling online, actually, I'm very sure you're familiar with social selling. All right. I think that is definitely one of the trends that we'll talk about and how that is increasingly, right, taking over what we call as in-store selling, right? As you can appreciate, this is extremely effective, right? If you know how to engage influencers well enough, the revenues and the ROIs you're getting from your sales, right, it's actually comparable, if not better, than those who are actually doing in-stores or on-site premises selling. Yeah, good. Now, moving on. Okay, moving on. Right. So, um, you can appreciate that actually, if you look at the trends that I've identified, and if you look at some of the key statistics that I've seen, right? Actually, the dominance of digital is something that's very key and important. This is because, again, like I said, and I stress so many times with regards to the infrastructure, with high internet and mobile penetration, it only makes sense that the internet access for Singapore is almost universal, as much as 96%. You literally, if you look at digital advertising, you could literally reach out to anyone and everyone, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and also increasingly with the time spent. Yeah. The time spent has increasingly grown, right? I think what would used to be what we call as leisure surfing is no longer actually leisure surfing. In fact, it has actually gone to also widespread of adopting the use of internet for the use of work-related and research purposes, and increasingly the exposure of our time to um, to internet has actually be as much as at least about 4 to 5 hours per at least per day, if I may say so. Yeah, right. CJ mentioned that you actually hate them all in terms of advertising. Well, of course, if you hate them, if it's not relevant to you, but I'm very sure to most of us who are actually kind of, have the intent to buy something, online advertising do come in handy and do come in helpful as well, right? Now, the other thing is also about the apps, right? Simply because with the use of mobile devices, the accessibility, and and this also would mean that there are also a lot more apps that we use a lot more. There are a lot more apps that we use frequently, right? Popular apps, as you can appreciate, would be the likes of TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Depending on which category of users you are, each of them has got its specific benefits. E-commerce and gaming trends is definitely on the rise, or it's actually dominated as well, clearly, right? I mean, with the infrastructure, again, I might say, right, with a very strong infrastructure connection for internet, the likes of e-commerce and gaming becomes a lot more accessible. And the fact that today, not just that, the idea that today the delivery, right, the logistical infrastructure, I think that's a given plus as well, where businesses are increasingly understanding the importance, the connection, the transportation, because then that would only serve of means to facilitate e-commerce activities, right? Yeah, good. So, I mean, primarily, if we look at research, it's all pointing to largely about the trends and the dominance of digital. And only with this, you may say that actually advertising will continue to thrive and it will continue to be extremely competitive, right, in the Singapore context. All right. And unless if you have the fundamentals or you understand what it is required for you to establish, then it would become, as I may say, a less costly lesson for you to learn, right? If not, if you were to jump in blind, it's going to be one of the most expensive lesson, as with all advertising. It's going to be extremely expensive lesson for everyone to learn. So I hope you guys would pay attention with regards to what would be helpful when you think about advertising with regards to the abilities and the costs involved. So let's look at some trends, right? After we look at the current landscape, let's look at what was really trending in the top 10 in the past a year, right? Before we jump into the trends for 2025. So one of the top 10 trends that we looked at was actually programmatic advertising. For those who are new, programmatic advertising simply means that today, in terms of advertising, it has somewhat automated. When I say automated, what does it mean? It means to say that there is a marketplace which then allows the matching of advertisers like yourself, those who are in need of advertising, and publishers and media owners. That means those who are actually making content and making revenue out from producing content, matching it. And this is important. So importantly, so is because, as you can appreciate as well, with the increase in terms of the with a better infrastructure, right? Internet connection infrastructure, there are going to be loads more content out there. And with loads more content, the attention span of every consumer that you can imagine out there is significantly reduced. Why? Because everyone then starts to be very selective, right? Selective in terms of the content that they choose to consume, right? And in the same aspect, with that, then you need to then know that with the kind of selectivity, right, it is then a little bit more difficult to reach out to the desired target audience. And in order to allow a matching of needs and a matching of supply, right, between both parties.
How to make it louder? Don't know.
Am I not loud enough? Is this louder?
Yeah, cannot loud enough lah.
Is this louder? Can you guys hear?
Very clear.
Because controlled by him.
Okay, thank you so much, Lorraine. Yeah, for those of you, yeah, if you can't, please let me know so that I can speak louder. If not, I can always adjust my mic volume to louder. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. If you are in a noisy place, then maybe use your headsets. That would help you. Okay. Ken, thank you so much for giving me the thumbs up. Appreciate it. So yeah, so it is about understanding that today there's tools out there, and with the introduction of AI, clearly that benefits you, right? Because there's a lot of research needed. And I'm pretty sure that with the kind of time that you have between having to run your business and trying to figure out what would be the advertising research that's needed to support your means, it is best to actually kind of leverage it. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. Social commerce for sure. All right. Social commerce is another aspect, as you have identified. Those of you who are familiar to the social media platform, the likes of Facebook and for TikTok, there are live streams in which selling is done through it. Of course, the idea of selling is really about trying to authenticate the business, right? Because as we all know, um, the premise of how today selling pretty much depends on the trust and reliability. And I think as advertisers or as consumers ourselves, we often sometimes are cautious and skeptical about what websites are offering, if they're genuine or not. And therefore, the likes of e-commerce platform is important as a payment portal to safeguard your interests. And the likes of understanding that today, if there was someone with a face to show, it represents the authenticity of the business, right? It helps to secure trust. And therefore, it is another aspect to look at. Yeah. Um, so we then look at another trend would be video ads and short form content. Now, the premise of short form content is more so simply because if we look at content, right, there are two types of content, primarily long form and short form. And in the past, what used to be long form used to be of qualitative, it was of quality, as quality, high quality consideration. Short form was difficult, but I think over time, um, content creators have learned to be smart, have learned to understand the impact of short form, and also primarily also because of human behavior, right? The content consumption of us, and like I said, so because of the abundance of content, we tend to be extremely selective. And in meaning selective, we also learn to identify content that are we prefer to consume content that are in short form. When I say short form, it's likely to be a minute to 2 minutes max of sorts, right? And there are more and more of these, and these are actually quite important because um, it is about trying to get as much space as possible, airspace within the consumer's mind, and the fact that consumers are easily distracted. So therefore, the idea of how you need to create an impactful 1 or 2 minute is important, because then only when consumers then have the time to want to dive deeper and have more interested, then they look at the longer form content. Yeah. Just to quickly ask, right, someone talked about how the mix of programmatic advertising in Singapore context. What it means is there are certain platforms, right? Because if you look at how you're accessing directly into platforms the likes of YouTube, um, it will mean that today you're likely to be directly engaging with the media owner and the content provider, in this case, which is YouTube as a platform. But programmatic is more about an ad managing platform where there's a network of content creators that sign up for it, and they give Google an opportunity to monetize it, right? And vice versa. So this is actually behind the scenes. There is just two systems, a supply side platform and a demand side platform, actually talking to one another. And that's what it means about programmatic. Yeah. What programmatic tools company use to do in advertising? I mean, the programmatic tools itself is more about how you're establishing the parameters in terms of the costs, in terms of how or the types of target audience you want to reach out to, the nature of the content, some of the what we call as the context of the content you're trying to reach out. So it allows you to be able to look at it from a very broad perspective, the entire network, global network, if not Singapore network. And then what it does, it then reaches out to matching, right? Matching the profile of the consumers against the needs of the advertiser. So you put in a few parameters, and what it does, it will then troll the entire network. When I say the entire network, what does it encompass? It encompasses those websites who may not necessarily subscribe to a few main key advertising platform. I mean, one of the key advertising platform, as we all are very familiar and primarily clued into, is the likes of Google Ads, right? But there are other ad platforms, for example, like the Singapore Media Exchange is one example, right? Where effectively under a collective term of a network of websites, right, that is generally hosted and managed by Singapore Press Holdings and Media Corp, right? That is one platform as well. I mean, for the regular advertisers may not necessarily have privy to, but for those who wants to explore and has got a little bit more budget to spend, would be actually interesting for them to explore these ad platforms. I mean, I would say that if done correctly, it can be efficacious as well in terms of how you advertise. Yeah. Now, one of the key things we're looking at is cookieless advertising, right? Now, we say cookieless advertising, as you can also understand that because of the increasing uh, what we call as the privacy, right? The idea of what we call as the data protection of consumers, right? Increasing consumers are becoming aware of how the data, right, is being harvested from their laptop, their devices when they're servicing, and how it's being used for monetization efforts. And primarily so, and that's the reason why cookie, it used to be cookie, is now going to be cookieless, is because of the fact that when this information has a lot to be told, and there can be a lot of information that can be tracked, advertisers are very, or rather, consumers are very concerned. And then increasingly, when cookieless advertising is coming into play, the idea of cookieless would mean that profile, actually first party advertising, is increasingly becoming dominant. When I say first party, what does it mean? It means that today, the likes of media owners and websites, they would have to think about how they are actually allowing advertisers to target. And all the more, in terms of ourselves as advertisers, it's important for you to look at growing your own database, right? Because specifically, right, when a lot of consumers out there is afraid of how advertising has actually intruded into their own privacy, they will only be willing to subscribe and share information, right, with websites who either allow them to monetize or actually give them a benefit, right, in return for using or for targeting ads to them, right? So that's what we're looking at. Omni-channel strategies is something that we want to pay attention with regards to advertising. When I say omni-channel strategy, what does it mean? It means that it is no longer a single device, it's actually multiple device and multiple platform access. I mean, primarily what we're saying here is when someone accesses the internet, all right, actually through multiple platforms, right? It's no longer just a mobile phone. Sometimes when you're busy, you can actually switch from mobile phone to a laptop. And what you're doing halfway at a laptop, you may continue to browse or consume content through a tablet. So as you can see, right, it's actually across different devices. And sometimes it's also extended to where you are, is you are walking along the street, right? You're walking along the street and you expose yourself to certain media, like, if you're at lift lobbies, right? For those of you who actually take the public transport, and if you can, as you can imagine that today, if you are taking at the lift, there is an advertising screen, right? As you can see, some of them are actually managed by either by target media or by focus media. They're managing those screens, yeah. And you'll be surprised, or well, don't be surprised that when you expose yourself to one of those ads and you actually kind of move on to looking and consuming content in your mobile phone, you could also be targeted, right, as one of the consumers, right, for those ads. So this is what we call omni-channel. Yeah. Behavioral and demographic targeting is something that I think fundamentally a lot of people who are new to advertising is not aware of. Primarily, when we say targeting, traditionally, we have always been looking at demographics, right? Demography is what I'm saying. The likes of age, gender, family nucleus, interest, right, is something that we used to be relying on in the past. Um, Alone itself, it is merely data and statistical in nature. It doesn't really signify intent. And what we have learned in advertising over the years from a psychological perspective, intent is key. And often intent is exhibited through behavior or through keywords. And that's why a lot of advertisers would consider search advertising. And also, if you go and explore some of the advertising platforms out there, likes of Facebook and Google, they have also begun to share the likes of behavior, right? Behavior targeting. And this is very helpful simply because when we talk about intent, it's really about how we are doing certain things and we translate an action. An action is representative of what we're thinking as an intent. So if you had an intent to buy, it's very natural that from a behavioral standpoint, you will start to search for content and you start to make comparison in terms of price, brands, values, features, benefits, right? So these are what we call as behavioral targeting. Yeah. Mobile first advertising, needless to say, I mean, simply because when we talk about how we are being mobile, and we would probably be using our mobile device most of the time, that will be our first a point of call in terms of content consumption, right? Yeah. So clearly, it gives us a lot of opportunity for ads to be personalized. And that's why it's mobile first, because being a mobile user, it's a very, very intimate experience. And when we say intimate experience, what we are really saying is it becomes very captive when you're looking at content. You get drawn in the content. In fact, it becomes a lot more engaging because it makes someone sit forward in looking at mobile phone as opposed to sitting back when looking at TV. So there's a big difference in terms of how it works psychologically. So that's why sustainability and social responsibility. I mean, clearly, of course, as consumers, we are increasingly aware in terms of what climate changes is and has been for us, as you can all experience, right? Monsoon weather has somewhat pushed back, right? I mean, we would expect monsoon to affect Singapore in the late October, November of last year and December as well, but we didn't really experience that too much, right? It was a lot more hot and humid weather. And it was only in the recent weeks that we were seeing heavy rainfalls, and this is likely to happen all the way to March. So there seems to be a bit of a pushback. And with this, of course, then what we're saying is really about how all these have got to play, right, in terms of what it means. So today, what we're looking is manufacturers, people who produce goods, increasingly is becoming aware in terms of how they're leaving a carbon footprint and whatever they need to, and they're producing, they need to be aware of how sustainable it is in terms of production. And with consumers, we are also increasingly having to understand that these are now part of our values, and we will be very cognizant of the businesses that we support, and therefore having value alignment between what we buy and what we believe, and what businesses and how businesses produce them, and how they market their products and services has got very strong alignment. Yeah. Ethical advertising, of course, clearly is something that is becoming a norm, right? When we say ethical advertising, we look at how today advertisers, when they sell something online, almost immediately we would expect that the goods, we would expect a certain level of customer service would need to happen because of what you increasingly have to pay, and the cost of the product is also increasingly eating into your ability to buy. In the idea here that the expectation also has increased, right? So advertising is important. Performance-based advertising, of course, needless to say, right? As businesses grow, the idea here that every single dollar, as some of you have identified, when it's becoming expensive, every dollar that you spend needs to be cost effective. And therefore, we look towards performance-based advertising. Some of you are familiar with what we term as cost per click, because you only pay when someone responds to an ad. So that then clearly becomes performance-based, or in many sense, some of you might look into social selling, where you would only pay a commission or a price when someone has effectively sold, right? Yeah. And interactive ad formats, again, more simply because of the bandwidth and the infrastructure that we have. Videos, as I say, video ads and ads that allows you to interact, right? As you will see later, I'll share with you some video format which allows audiences to comment, and it actually picked up the content from your comments, and he actually kind of replies back to you, right? So that's what we call interactive ads. So increasingly, the idea here that today digital advertising is no longer what we call as a passive form of engagement. At the same time, while it's two-way, it's increasingly becoming very responsive real time, right? No longer there's time whereby you look at an ad, you provide a feedback, and then maybe 1 or 2 days later, someone responds. It's almost as good as saying that today, with the idea that you could actually put in a conversational bot into advertising. And literally, when you ask a question, you get a response in return quite spontaneously. So that's something to think about. Okay, good. Now, we have seen now what the top 10 trends are for 2024. Okay, we will now move on to some of the key trends that we think potentially will get more intense, and therefore it's something that you want to pay attention to if you are in the advertising industry, right? Or those who are new, something that you want to pay attention in terms of leveraging on to make sure that you remember that you take advantage of it since if you're on board. Okay, the advancement of AI. Okay, now, all of you are familiar with AI, I believe. You may not be familiar from a technical perspective, but I think largely by and far, if you look at it from a consumption perspective, you may be exposed to some elements of generative AI, where today largely it's a language model where it allows you to be able to use layman terminology and to be able to perform interactions, right, real time, as if you're talking to a person. And it is taken into consideration the context of what you're asking as well. Okay. There are different levels of AI. I'm just going to briefly introduce you the different levels of AI simply because it has it has implications with regards to the types of technology that is going to be built into advertising, right? So we have your general intelligence, right? Is in between AI and machine learning. All right. Then, I mean, some examples is taken in context is the likes of Siri, Alexa, or Google. Right. Some of you may have what we call as voice-activated devices at home, and you may actually activate Google to ask them to read to you news, to ask them to turn on the lights for you. Right. So those are voice activation. Yeah. And then the next level is what we call as machine learning. There's some sort of a either structured or unstructured learning where content is constantly feed in, either in a supervised or unsupervised manner. All right. And the system would learn and every time to understand the facets and the perspective of it. Right. So increasingly the knowledge ability has expanded. And with the enhanced knowledge ability, the performance and the response would also be enhanced, right? It no longer provides one answers, but it will look at it from a different angle and be able to tailor the answers accordingly. The next level of AI is what we call as your generative AI, right? Generative by virtue, it means is that today it is able to take in a lot of um, syntaxes, a lot of what we call as language models, words, understand the meaning behind it, and therefore it allows them to be able to create, and that's why it's called generative. It's able to generate, whether if it's generating responses or images or, in matter of fact, videos. All right, that's another level of how AI is being incorporated into advertising. Okay, and of course, last but not least is your ChatGPT 4, right? Yeah. So, I mean, while there are many layers, I think what we want to do is to understand and recognize how does this impact advertising. And the applications of it largely is in the realms of programmatic advertising and AI-powered audience targeting. Now, why these two? I mean, simply because I think because of the fact that data is a key element. And when data is sending a key element, the need to crunch numbers, the need to analyze numbers, the need to collect information at real time requires something that the human mind is almost impossible to do it. And that's the reason why. And it makes sense, right? And that's why we have the idea of programmatic advertising, where imagine if today, as an advertiser, when you establish the likes of an audience parameters, that means if you want to say that, people who are perhaps, not just demography, female of a certain age or male of a certain age, but have got interest in this, would also be buying products and who have actually accessed an e-commerce portal in the past 3 months and bought something. Along those lines of complexity, data is able to crawl, consolidate, and therefore put forth, right? And say that these are individuals, machines. That means there are people behind the machines who are now browsing, has got this kind of traits. And as advertiser, if you want to reach out to them, is able to match. And when I say match, means that today, as an advertiser, when you establish all these complex parameters, they are able to determine the behavior and the intent and display an ad. And that's what we want. We really want an ad that's relevant. Let's be honest, right? The reason why we have ads that we hate is simply because a lot of times ads get thrown to us and ads that are irrelevant. But the premise of that is usually what happens is advertising is key simply because it actually unlocks an awareness in the human mind. And only when it unlocks the awareness, then you have identified that there's a need, and therefore you will start looking for a solution. So let's face it, it's actually quite common. And advertisers will lose out if they don't advertise. Sure, a lot of businesses say that they rely on word of mouth. But the virtue of word of mouth itself is advertising, right? But unfortunately, because by virtue of advertising, sometimes it can be slow. While it's reliable, it can be sustainable. But the idea is having to grow rapidly. It is impossible. It's difficult. Yeah. Um, and the idea here is with AI in place, right? I mean, the premise of that is to be able to look at it and say, I'm able to predict, and I'm able to say that when someone has gone through a website and a series of behavior has been, it is likely that this person is going to buy something of a particular brand, price, and also likely to take action within the next few weeks. This is what we call the increased accuracy of predictability. And yes, that kind of measurement requires AI's help. And only by doing so, right, then, like I said, the idea that you spend your advertising and your marketing dollars would be in a smart way what you're doing, right? You're being smart about how you spend money. You're being smart in terms of how you're leveraging on technology to advertise, which if you don't do so, then it'll be unwise for you, right? Because then what you're saying is you're only beginning to embrace what advertising has to offer to you 10 years ago, right? And in many means, you're actually kind of wasting money. So it's important for you to understand its capability. And therefore, AI-powered audience targeting is a given, simply because AI-powered audience targeting means that today it's able to look at context, is able to look at you, is able to look at how they can personalize content for your consideration, right? I mean, let's face it, right? I mean, who, how would you feel, right, if you are walking into a store and the fact that when you walk to the store owner knows who you are, right? I mean, if you think about it, it's almost likened to the fact that today, if you went to grocery shopping in your local wet market and you actually buy with the products with a person long enough who knows the quality of the product you intend to buy, the price point, and specifically your habits, I mean, it actually kind of eases, right? It eases the ability and it facilitates, right? It facilitates your your method and the process of buying and takes a lot of load off of it, right? I mean, clearly it's because we all know the human brain, while we have got capacity to process. We don't necessarily process things too much and too many, right? And we'll get fatigued. And that's why the idea of AI actually helps, right? You don't have to rely on AI to make the decision, but what you do need to think of is to be smart on how to use AI to be able to crunch numbers, to help to look at large volume of data points and to actually help you to facilitate decision making, right? A lot easier. So that's what it is. So when we look at that, we then narrow down specifically in terms of what are some of the key technologies used in AI, if you haven't noticed already. All right. Things like text understanding, sentiment analysis, question answering systems, language understanding in healthcare, improving accessibility, text generation, information extraction, and last but not least, language translation. Can you see that? Can you see how this actually enables advertising? And all this is largely simply because of what? Of the needs of consumers. With consumers, there are needs. And because of our limited capacity in terms of what we do, right, in terms of what we need, therefore, we need to leverage on AI to help us. And therefore, it only makes sense that we use this to help us in terms of advertising. Yeah. And from that, we then progress on to computer vision, right? And that's why, I mean, if you haven't seen already, I think some of you might have been exposed to the likes of Google Glasses, right? Or Google Lenses. Yeah, whereby what happens is you're wearing a pair of glasses and the glass actually takes a vision of the scene or product. And what it does is it can actually do a lookalike search, or it can actually make recommendations about the context of where you are, which in a while I'll demonstrate, not with Google Lens, but in a sense it's similar with voice search, right? You will see and understand what I mean. But what it does is it actually allows us as a human being to have conversation with an advertisement, so that you can ask questions until you get exhausted with asking questions and you are satisfied with the answer. Then you decide, right? Because a lot of times when we ask questions, typically we are either met with either there's no information available, or the individual or the person that we speak to or interacted with, representative, may not necessarily have all the information there. So then how do you bridge that gap, right? Because there could be a whole lot of information sitting in a database somewhere. How do you marry that information, right, to meet the questions of consumers, is something which I think will also happen very soon, right? If not already happening, it will increasingly close that knowledge gap, right, in terms of how information is being fed to consumers. Okay. And then, of course, then these are some of the applications, right, that can be used. Not necessarily in terms of advertising, but the idea is there as you get it, right? Yeah. And the premise of this is really to close the information gap as much as possible. And yeah, and of course, then what we're saying is it actually helps to trigger the ambivalence, right, of most. So as an advertiser, I would say that it is actually very exciting, right? Because if you think about it, what you think as a product, when you have loads of information, you may dread thinking about how this information is stored away somewhere deep into your cloud storage, and no one will know, actually will become readily accessible so long as you allow it to be accessible. And then all the more this information will become helpful to facilitate decision making, right? Consumers who have access on their fingertips will only have one thing in mind. When can find information that's being provided to me without me having to have the hassle of going and search and think of questions to ask, I'm all the more informed and I'm ready to make the decision. That's what it strictly means, right? So it facilitates decision making, if not already. Yeah. So The rise of AI in programmatic advertising and personalization. These two comes together, right? Simply because today, think about it. If Nike were to run an ad, right, as a brand example, and many branded shoes, it doesn't have to be Nike, it can be Adidas, it can be your local Bata shoe shop as well. If they were to think about advertising, you can appreciate the fact that today, well, traditionally they would have to think of an ad, and that ad would either be brand driven or very product driven. And you can imagine that today, if that ad specifically or the product is of only one color and you show, that ad may not appeal to every one of us, right? But you can appreciate the fact that today, if imagine that today there are 10 of us in this room right now who have an interest for a particular brand, a color, and I want to know if the size is available. AI can help bridge the gap with advertising, right? Think about it. Think about the idea where today, if you were to come across an ad and you happen to be in a mood of shopping for shoes and you saw an ad, and what it does is the ad will show you a shoe of your color, design, and also understanding of your interests specifically, right? Your traits. Whether today you are someone who likes to walk or likes to run or play tennis. Yeah, wouldn't that be fabulous actually, right? Because then it will take the load off you having to manually search for it, but actually just to have a decent conversation with someone who is knowledgeable and have all the information about availability of the product at our fingertips, right? So you can imagine. So AI is key, okay? And it's key simply because it is really about how today it is an enhanced form of targeting for advertising, right? It is no longer the normal advertising in the past, but it is enhanced, right? Simply because, like I said, it goes beyond a basic demographic. It also looks at lookalike audiences. So you can imagine, right? For those of you who are already having a pool or a handful of customers on hand, maybe you have 1,000 customers and you have been servicing. And what you want to know is, how do I find another 1,000 customers who are like these current customers? That means 1,000 prospects who are like these customers of mine currently in my database. Wouldn't that be a happy problem? Because then what you want to do is to get AI to start looking for what we call as lookalike audiences, right? You have a database, you have started to collect some decent information in terms of when they purchase, the frequency of the purchase, the amount of money that they purchase, the brands and the features and benefits that what they actually buy, and have AI start looking and crawling, right, the internet for these audiences. Wouldn't that be a godsend? I think in many sense, from an advertiser perspective, that would be, right? And the best part about it is the ads will adjust accordingly, depending on trends as well. Yeah, so that would be fantastic. One example here, right, would be, for example, here, in terms of booking.com. I'm sure most of you would probably, would have actually returned from a recent travel. And for those of you who actually kind of use booking.com or any other booking engine, would also be seeing and be familiar with this, right? Where today, in how booking portals, right, the likes of booking.com or hotels.com, what they've done is they look at personalization, right? They look at your profile, they look at the types of properties that you have been exploring, right? The requirements you put in as a prerequisites, and then it will make suggestions. And this helps. Why? Because, as I said, so the human brain is, how should I say, while it's powerful, but at the same time, it is not necessarily a muscle that withstand very long processing. So therefore, processing is short. And that's why we often, more than not, are very selective in terms of how we search for data and how it supports our decision making. What this does is the system AI actually helps to look at all the properties matches, and although also take in consideration behavioral searches of others who have actually successfully booked and made the booking with the hotels, would then make that recommendation. When it does that, it actually increases the likelihood of a booking rate, right? Can you see that? Return visitors saw an increase in 60% increase in cart additions and a 70% increase in conversion rates, right? So yeah. Another one would be the likes of Procter and Gamble, how they have actually used targeting, right? To look at how they can target consumers and with that actually increase their ROI. So there are merits in terms of using AI in advertising. It's not something that is new, but again, it's not something that is untested. It is something that has been learned time and time again. And actually, like I said, it is after all machine in many sense. You need to teach the machine. You have to teach them how to learn and identify behavior. And it only makes sense that you start early. The earlier the start, the better it is being performed, right? Just like humans. When you are trying to master a skill, it is only with years of experience that you put in the effort that you get better each time, right? In many sense, AI is also that same function. Okay. Another area where AI in programmatic advertising and personalization is actually optimized bidding, right? Again, this is not something that's new, but it only gets better. When I say optimized bidding, what does it mean is the ability to predict. And for those of you who are familiar with cost per clicks, performance-based advertising, the likes of Google search, Google ads, where you only pay when someone clicks on the ad, right? It's also available in the likes of social media or Facebook as well. It then looks at the profile of the audiences, what they click on, where they click on, and they try to find a lookalike, because then what they're trying to do is identify, right? Identify intent, where someone has got an intent to buy a product and they find a match, they're likely to be able to say that, expose this ad to someone that's likely to click on it from a behavioral perspective. And when you do that, they also know the price points, right? I mean, that's the idea. The idea is to optimize it. Why? Because many of times when we look at advertising, in the past, it's always about having to put a price point where you are either competing with the highest bidder, that means to say you got to spend more money, or you got to figure out how to create a more compelling ad so that it will increase the exposure, right? So this is a lot of trial and testing. Of course, it only makes sense that only if the trial and testing were being learned through a machine, and then the machine learning would then make it efficacious, and efficacious in some sense will help you to reduce wastage. In fact, it will be cost savings. All right. And you wouldn't be wasting money, it wouldn't be expensive. The word to be looking out for is actually cost effective. That's what it is, right? For sure. Last but not least is also fraud detection, because I remember once upon a time when there wasn't AI, fraud detection relies on human to pick up the fraud. Whether in terms of ads, whether we had to manually look at whether the ads were actually very closely clicked simultaneously more than once. That signifies fraud in some sense, because a normal person, or rather a human, would never do that. A bot will do that, right? So that's what we do. We actually take that into consideration. But right now, we actually allow us to leverage on AI to help to perform that function. So there's an elimination of wastage, elimination of fraud. So what you have is, in some sense, as close to authenticity in terms of how someone clicks on your ad, right? Yeah. Example of bid simulations. Okay. These are some examples where if you have been using the likes of Google, right? And you look at the cost per acquisition, right? Search, whether if it's search campaign, okay. There are some numbers we'll share, right? The numbers will share with you about the likelihood and the predictability. When you put a certain price points, what will be, yeah, yeah. Okay. But at least what we're saying here is today, you go in with both eyes open. You go in with the idea that you now have visibility in terms of how data is being crunched, how it's being processed, and then you can make an informed decision. That's what it simply means, right? Because in the past, you would have to second guess and you have to look at past trends to be able to predict. And we know for a fact that it's never going to work if past trends will predict the future. Why? Because if the past has been a failure, you're likely to predict failure, right? What we want to do is to look at the opportunities whereby often it's limited by the human brain, right? We look at the perspective, we look at the context in terms of how the ads are ran and the price points. And what we do is we are leveraging on AI to look at the possible permutations of what a price point would be, a combination of benefits would be that would help you to either create a new market to penetrate or identify a behavior which the layman may not have picked up, right? That's the idea. And with this bid simulation, will give you a scenario that if you put a certain price point and you change your bid, whether it's more than 10 or 15% of how you pay for an ad, is able to predict the likelihood that you're going to be able to use the budget or you're going to waste your money, right? So that's the plus points about bid simulation. So it's actually in action. You only get better. So if you were to be new in advertising and you're looking at bid advertising and performance advertising, make sure that you access this function, right? Because these functions are already available and it will only make sense that you start because then you will start to invest in terms of how you're actually leveraging on data. Yeah. One of the more of the service providers in the market is Integral Ad Science, right? These names are actually names of providers that are actually well known in the advertising industry. Okay, specifically the likes of the media agencies of sorts. They look at quality impressions, right? Because I think what we perhaps didn't have in the past was to understand if someone truly saw an ad, because an ad was measured pretty much by how the ad was being caught by a machine and how it's being delivered. And by virtue of how it's being caught and it's being delivered, the terminology behind that, the system will count as an ad has been exposed one, as we call an impression. But the impression may not necessarily be of a quality impression, is what we're saying, right? When we say quality, what does it mean? It means that number one, this ad is clearly visible. It's not hidden. It's not 3/4 of the ads are hidden behind and beyond the first fold. At least 3/4 of ads have been exposed into your screen, regardless of whether it's a laptop screen, a tablet screen, or a mobile screen, it can be tracked. Okay. They can differentiate between whether or not the human being is actually surfing it or is actually a bot that's surfing the ads and just crawling for information, right? And the best part about it is about the suitability of where your ads are, right? Because in the past, when we ran an ad, we had to literally, right, tell media owners about how we don't like to run ads on news that is either about an accident or tragedy, right? I mean, it's clearly quite known and it's a known fact in industry that often with travel companies, they very rarely like to have ads that's running against an article that's talk about a crash or that talks about something that's detrimental. They don't like the idea because it has got a negative impact with regards to sentiments towards a brand. And sentiments are very important, all right? As we all know, we may think that today we are very rational decision makers, but the reality is we are not. Often and not, it is us having to make decisions using emotions, but only if emotions are regulated, right? And the idea is to ensure that today the sentiments of the consumers and the buyers, right, would be positive. Because then only when you have positively, it will then lead to positive actions as the likes of purchase, search, and having something to do with the brand engagement, in fact, right? So these has got correlation. So as you can see, right, there's so many data points. And with AI, by leveraging your AI, it allows you to look at all these facets of information, take them into consideration as a holistic perspective. And clearly, with that, it mimics as much as possible what a human would think of, what a human is predictably likely to do, and therefore tells you that there's someone that's paying attention to the ad. So you see, so rather than saying that, it's expensive, what we're saying right now is the idea that today when you're investing in ads and if intent is to advertise, it only makes sense that you leverage on AI to help you with advertising. Yeah. Improve creative optimization. This is another trend that we see that's very clearly for so, because if you think about it right now, increasingly the likes of Facebook and like of Google is getting you to create as many versions as possible and try to incorporate as many components of an ad as possible, right? Whether or not you have an image for a male consumer, a female consumer, whether or not you have an image or product for someone that is of the youth, of the senior, of the elderly, all right, of a married couple of sorts, of someone that have got certain interests, of someone that is single, yeah. All this is going to be helpful. Why? Because then the ads become dynamic, because then what you are guaranteed of is for sure, as someone with an intent to buy, you'll be more than happy to see an ad that's relevant to you, right? The idea is that it's because you have an interest and you have intent to buy. And of course, the idea is for a showcase of multiple products that's suited for your taste and your price points. That's the idea. Then we would be receptive towards ads, right? I think for the longest time, um, there's a love-hate relationship with advertising, more so because we get either intrusive ads or ads that's not relevant to us. But when there is a need and you've identified it, it is almost a given that you would embrace ads only if it's relevant and it suits your needs, right? Okay. One example is very clearly Netflix, right? Maybe some of you may not be subscribed to Netflix. It could be Hulu or anyone, but I'm just using this as an example. As you can see, traditionally, the way we advertise and how Netflix actually promotes program, right, is very, very rigid, less flexibility when it first started. It's really about how they put words, and by looking at content based on words and how people search. But consider this, right? Think about it. This is actually a showcase of how you are actually promoting a program, but based on the interest or actors that or celebrities that you as a viewer could be interested in, right? So you can imagine that if you are someone who is familiar with actors like, in this case, either Minnie Driver or Matt Damon, what the AI does is try to extract images when they try to promote the film Goodwill Hunting. They will try to extract images of the co-stars and the stars, and they try to show it to you. And someone who is, for example, a fan of, in this case, Robin Williams, what AI does is to extract an image or a screenshot with Robin Williams and they promote Goodwill Hunting. So can you see what it does? It actually is showcasing you ads, but more so ads that are of interest to you. That means someone that will understand you better, know your likes and dislikes in many sense, and shows you what it is, right? Yeah. And it goes on, right? Moves on to, as you can see, how in this case, Pulp Fiction that was being marketed can be marketed either showing the likes of Uma Thurman or John Travolta, whichever celebrity that you are likely to embrace. Yeah. Good. So the next one is on interactive storytelling. I'm going to show you this ad, right? This ad was actually done in collaboration. Interestingly, the likes of Google Phone and iPhone, they collaborated by using AI chatbot into this to create a content. And what they did was to look at the comments feed, right? I want you to take a look. and it was picking up the comments because people were commenting in the video, right? There's a feed, and if you are familiar with YouTube, there's a comment section where you put in the comments, and the AI that's built into this actually picked it up and created a conversation behind it. So let's look at this. I hope you can hear the volume. Let me kind of double check to make sure that I've shared again. I just check one more time to make sure that yes, I've shared the sound. Okay, so I'm going to play.
What's up, everybody? It's Pixel and iPhone. We're diving into the comments to see what you all have been
Hold on, sorry.
saying about our video series. Now, I've been doing this for a while, but Pixel, remember not to let the haters get you. You've gotta have a thick skin. Don't worry, I'm coated on both sides with Gorilla Glass. Let's see what's up first. Okay, low key, it's so bad and cringy that it's good. You know what? I'll take it. Me too. Thanks for watching. Okay, next one. Maybe let's. I love my iPhone, but these are too funny. Thanks. You just read that? Yeah, I've got live translate. Impressive. Okay, next. Oh, I love Pixel, heart emoji. I recently switched from an iPhone. Wow. Oh, sorry, iPhone. There are plenty more comments. Let's see. Oh, iPhone, look. I love both Google and Apple. Aw, we love you too, friend. Okay, we got one more here. Well, actually it's a bunch. Yeah, this is one we definitely need to address. Yes, we really appreciate everyone offering to ship us. Unfortunately, due to liability reasons, we can only be shipped by our authorized distribution centers. Such a nice offer though, thanks fam. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button.
Okay. Humor. Just hang on for a while. Shift. Okay, good. Hang on for a while. I need to get back to my navigation so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, good. Yeah. So you can see over there, right, what it means really. It's about how today the idea that it is actually incorporated. Can yeah. So can you see what's happening? Let me share with you how that was created. Actually, you can see Google actually provided a breakdown of how they were actually working with multiple parties to create this, right? And you can imagine that with this was being created, they actually did a road trip and people were putting in countries, and actually both Google and iPhone were traveling around the world based on what people's input was. And you can see the breakdown of how it is. They've simplified by telling you that, such an ad, and specifically being a video ad, interactive ad, it is possible. Yeah, it is possible. Yeah, for you to come up with a similar ad. So what we're saying is we need innovators, and the fact that with innovation in terms of advertising, when that is in place, all right, increasingly, um, more and more of such tools will be available and can be affordable. Okay. The idea of how when we are creating ads, and by creating advertising and sometimes with video ads, in the past, it probably take you at least a week to 2 weeks to develop a decent video. But with such technology in place, and the fact that when you create a script and the script can be converted into a decent video that's for consumption over a mobile phone or more over YouTube, all right? And it can be done in a matter of just like within a day or less. All right. So that actually opens up the possibilities. It actually opens up, right, the possibilities of what it means for advertisers. And ads no longer have to be boring. and it doesn't have to be irrelevant. It can increasingly become interactive and engaging. That's what we want, right? Because if you think about it, as advertisers, we want engagement. And only when consumers engage with our brand do we truly understand that today we have a positive sentiment of our consumers towards our brand. Because think about it, if you don't like a brand, why would you want to converse and why would you want to engage? But the fact that if you so much as want to engage, it goes to show the brand positivity that you have towards it. And it is a signal for an advertiser to want to pay attention because it signifies the fact that today you have advocacy, you have brand advocates, you have people who are ready to buy the products, right, that you're offering. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, better measurement in attribution. Okay, this is another trend, right? Because traditionally, I think the idea of marketers today would still have to struggle, or rather, traditionally, marketers would have to struggle that effectively what happens is if you were to advertise across a whole media, right, a whole strew of media, you want to know exactly which of this media that you put your dollars behind it actually attributes to the dollars and cents of the sales that you have acquired, because that's what we call the importance of attribution. It also determines the type of marketing model, right, as a business owner, as an advertiser that you're looking at, right, as a marketer. So clearly with AI, it only shows that there is a greater transparency between the money you put in as an investment across the different platforms, whether it's TV, radio, out of home screen, digital mobile advertising, laptop. You will know which of these actually lends weight to a conversion, which of this actually has got a higher influencing point, right? Because in the past, there were so many models that we would only make sense. We say that it's last touch, but the last touch is only a hypothesis to say that when someone last saw the ad and then therefore immediately buy, which is not true, because we understand the fact that today, when someone's ambivalent to a need, clearly the ambivalence often can be triggered by you never know, right? Situations or something that triggers that idea that they need it. Okay. And usually what happens is it is often a series, multiple exposure of ads that happen before a decision is made to make a purchase. Yeah. So this is what we look at in terms of AI and how we then leverage on AI to help us with better measurements and attributions. Yeah. Okay. So there are many ways to use programmatic. Some of you have actually started asking questions about in terms of dollars and cents and spend. Actually, the investment, I would say, for advertising would be quite average. I think, if I'm not wrong, out there in the market. To want to invest in programmatic advertising, the investment is as little as $3,000. In the past, it used to be very much quite, how should I say, only a handful of people with the deep pockets of advertising can afford to do programmatic advertising. The reality is no, it's no longer so. Because if you believe in advertising, I imagine that easily you would have spent easily between $3,000 to $5,000 worth of advertising on a monthly basis if you're generating at least about 50, if not 100 grand of revenue on a monthly basis, right? Yeah. So then $5,000 compared to 100,000 revenue, 5%, it only makes sense that you need to invest in a platform like this, right? In something which actually helps you to. But because in the past, we don't have advertising, we don't have AI that helps us in programmatic advertising, we lose faith because we don't see immediate results. But now with transparency in advertising and the fact that you have AI to help you, all the more you should consider starting it, right? You consider the fact that you need to look at how you should be leveraging technologies on all facets to help you to actually advertise. So there are many ways for you to look at how you leverage on AI in advertising. And all this is not additional cost, I'll be honest with you. All these are baked into it. Simply because of the fact that today, with the wide adoption, right, and increasingly competitiveness in terms of how technology has to offer for advertisers, as many of you said, it's bot versus bot. Everyone is trying to get your money, trying to put or get through the door for you to invest in AI in advertising. That's the idea. So it makes sense for them to bake into it and not make you carry the additional cost, right? But only if there was an increase in advertising. That means there were more and more advertisers like yourself that actually adopts AI in advertising. Because if there is, then it clearly drives the adoption cost for AI in advertising down, right? Think of it that way. Yeah. Another trend that you see now, apart from AI in programmatic advertising, which I've talked about in great extensive, the next one we look at is really about voice search, okay, and advertising ads for the future of voice search, okay. I'm not too sure if any of you has been exposed to Gemini. Yeah, everyone heard of Gemini that is actually created by Google? Yes, good, thank you. All right, yeah. That is another brainchild, right, of which Google has to offer. And what it does, it is extended the reach, right, in terms of search, is in terms of just purely doing a search on general knowledge, is extended to advertising. Okay, how does it work? I'm going to give you an example. Okay, I'm going to activate my mobile phone, and I want you to listen to the conversation very carefully. Okay, if you can, please either put on a headset or you can turn on volume so you can hear this. Hopefully, right, it's loud enough for you to kind of hear. I've tested it several rounds, right? It's actually quite audible. And the idea is to actually kind of look at how it works. And I'll show you an example. Okay. Hey, Gemini, I'm actually in the vicinity of Northeast. Could you give me a list of cafes with with a Wi-Fi connection? Give me a list of location.
Here are some cafes with AAA in the Northeast area. MTF Coffee Shop. Located at 703 Hugang Avenue 2, it's open from 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. daily. It has a 3.8-star rating on Google Maps. Traditional coffee and toast. This 24/7 cafe is at 51 Hugang Avenue 9. It has a 3.3-star rating on Google Maps. Senghuat Coffee House at Hugang. Located at 811.
Okay, Gemini, I want to then talk about cafes, or rather, can you give me a list of cafes, right, with a rating of at least 4.5 and above? Oh no, I think the quality is important.
Here are some cafes in the Northeast area with a rating of at least 4.5 stars. Apollo Coffee Bar, located at 198 Serangoon Avenue, number 0101. It's open from.
Okay, let's talk about Apollo Coffee, but can you tell me, say, what are some of the food and price points that they have to offer? I repeat, can you tell me for Apollo, what are the menu and food and price points they have to offer?
Here's the information about MTF Coffee Shop's menu, food, and price points. Affordable prices. Most dishes cost between $3 and $10. Popular items. Signature prawns noodles, $10. Wanted.
So can you see that and can you hear that? I mean, right? So can you imagine right now specifically, right, where today, when you are, imagine if you are either walking or driving, and the fact that you can't do both, but if you have Gemini, Gemini got rid. Yeah, I mean, of course, the idea here is there is the
It sounds
aspects.
like you're describing how helpful it would be to have Gemini available while driving.
Okay, good enough. Okay, so yeah, So I guess you see, so the what I'm trying to say here is, of course, accuracy is one aspect that we have to consider. But the point is, today what we're saying is, with regards to advertising, it's longer just visual, right? It becomes engaging, and it's longer something which requires you to type a whole lot of context, or how you have to ask questions in a similar, in a very structured way. It becomes conversational. I think that's what we're trying to say, right? So today, then, advertising is really about a conversation to have, right? And it's almost likened to that of a word of mouth conversation that you're talking about. The only thing is today, again, like I said, it boils down to you as someone that's making decisions, right? Then, of course, it's about whether or not you have an informed decision you're making, and whether or not you have a gut feel, and you have a right gut feel specifically, right? So, yeah. So, I mean, the opportunities and the potential are there, right? I mean, the idea here that today, the limitations is no longer limited, okay? And it's really about you taking the leap of faith and to look at how specifically you want to use and leverage on this to your advantage, right? Yeah. So with interactive ads, I mean, it's very clear. Um, from voice, will then go on to video and AR filters, right? I mean, if you have seen some of the demonstration by glasses, right, Google glasses of sorts, they actually show the, I mean, if you can imagine that you actually kind of lost your way and you need directions, and what it does is the screen will tell you specifically how to walk, in what direction you're going, right? Information is now readily accessible, and with the use of bots, whereby today a database can be accessible, and in terms of the information, it can be collated and put together for you, and it can be read back to you. I think that's what it is really about, advertising. Yeah. Ad formats, all right. Ad formats, there's a link for you to go to. I won't share too much about this. I mean, really, it's about everyone. There's a link. When you get this, you'll be able to go in. It will show you a different types of ad format, because in the past, because when we talk about bandwidth, we talk about how there's limitation in terms of how an ad format specifications carry. It's limited because of the bandwidth. But with 5G coming forward, increasingly these host of solutions, what it can do and its capabilities is no longer one-dimensional. It becomes very responsive, and that's the idea about ad formats, right? Ken? So other trends that we look at is really about the emergence of new advertising platforms, right, and technologies. Again, like I said, TikTok is not something that's new. It started 2 years ago, but by definition, in terms of the adoption, right, it's increasing simply because of the fact that it offers a very unique environment with regards to content. And you got to be observant in terms of the nature of the content, how the content is being put together, and how that it delivers quite an impactful punch, even if it's only very short, 1 minute or less. All right. Another one is Twitch, a streaming service specifically for gaming, right? And how today, I mean, with regards to gamers, I think there's a very strong culture, and the virtue of its culture has got very strong influence. So then the likes of sports brands, right, leverage on these. The other forms of advertising technologies will be blockchain based. I won't go into much detail, but have a look at it. What it simply means is today, often when you look at advertising, you always have to rely on the media owners to give you information and background about the website, right? And this information and background about the website pretty much is almost a one-way. That means there's no way for you to verify that information where they tell you in terms of the reach, in terms of the audience, in terms of who is advertising with that. You can't. You really have to rely on them to tell you. And as skeptics as we are, this blockchain actually helps to debunk that. Okay? It offers very transparent end-to-end records of people advertising, of businesses that advertise, and to verify that there is an absolute audience, there's a real audience with genuine cases of advertising capabilities. And that lends weight to transparencies, and all the more it reinforces, number one, advertisers' faith in media owners, right? Selected media owners on who they advertise. Number two, Vice versa, actually, it reinforces the faith in media owners that today, if they do a good job in genuinely in creating content and engaging consumers or engaging the audience, they will not have a lack of advertisers that's knocking on the door, right? Because often in the past, because of their lack of transparency, advertisers become jaded by the fact that today, when they invest $1 in it, right, they struggle to reconcile whether or not, that effectively the advertising dollars are really put to, and people actually, they struggle to know whether or not today, is it that the creative is not engaging, or is it because the website's audience are not engaging, right? So this is what's usually happening. Yeah. Okay, good. Now, so far, what we've done is we have seen trends. We've seen what's really kind of going to be very successful, or whether what is going to be the trend for 2025. A lot of AI, as I mentioned, also taking in consideration how it's being used. I think that you shouldn't ignore. It's important. Now it's really about understanding a holistic approach, right? How do you then leverage on the latest trends, right? To look at, in terms of advertising, if this is your first timer, this is a good time for you to sit up and to understand specifically what will be some of the success factors. For those of you who is in the advertising industry, who have been around for a while, and not too sure in terms of what AI has to offer and what technology it has to offer, I do hope that this will give you a bit more information in terms of how you should look at this in constructing your campaigns, right? The use of AI-powered tools is important with regards to whether you are establishing the parameters of how you launch a campaign and how you analyze performance. Programmatic advertising is key if you want to look at improving your ROI. Short form content is key, right? But think about it specifically because why? All the more there's a need for you to occupy the space in consumers' mind, and the only way to do it is through short form. Of course, there's long form content, but usually long form content is meant for an educational purpose. But for advertising, usually short form content would be the way to go. Okay, embrace social media. Clearly, it drives sales. Okay, I mean, simply because of the fact that it's accessible, simply because of the fact that today there's protection, right? There's consumer protection in terms of when you buy things, when you're paying for a product, right? Your payment terms are being protected. That means you won't release, I mean, the funds won't be released to the seller until you are very sure that the product is at the door as in proper condition, right? Then you release the funds. So I think that's clearly one thing. Last but not least is really about your sustainability efforts, right? To make sure that today, if you intend to set up a business, make sure today you are mindful that the service offering and the product offering that you have is aligned with values, because advertisers or consumers today have placed a greater emphasis in terms of the value that you hold as a solutions or a product provider. Yeah. For voice search, think about the key search, right? Today, if you think about search, don't just think narrowly. Think about today, what are other key terms that you can use? The types of information that you put on your website is important. You must have the ability to allow Google to trawl to those information, to look at how those information can be read out, analyzed, and repeated back to the consumer, right? Location-based, always ensure that today when you run an search ad, always make sure that today you subscribe to location-based listing as well, right, on Google Maps, and make sure you provide as much information as possible. It's a holistic approach simply because today, as you said, consumer who buys your brand won't just look at one platform, they look at a plethora of accessibility, and they access in many ways in shape or form. You never know when they actually have a micro touch point with your brand. So it's important to look at it holistically. Track voice search campaigns performance, right? Now, the most important part about digital advertising is really about what? It's about offering a real time, right? Leveraging real time capabilities. Okay. And it's because of real time capabilities, it gives you the opportunity to look at how you can optimize your spends, reduce wastage. Traditionally, it has always been the need for us to eyeball, right? When you don't have technology in place, we have to extract information from different platforms, compile them laboriously, and then have to eyeball them. And only when someone with the experience look at campaign data will be able to provide a sound advice. But today, with so much data that's happening and the fact that you need to respond very quickly, it makes sense for you to leverage on AI to digest the information, process it, and provide you with optimal strategies. The idea is predictability and prescribe, right? To predict and prescribe solutions. And this is what comes in place with GA4. For those of you who have not subscribed to GA4 yet, to some extent, it does provide the capabilities. It provides prescriptions in terms of how you should enhance your website and how to be able to increase the conversion aspects of people buying from your website. So it actually maximizes ROI. Yeah? Ken? The ad and the website is only as good as the process. The idea that today, when you are engaging your audience, it is important for you to consider aspects of engagement, right? Remember, it's not just about the output, the outcome is also important. So the idea that today, the end-to-end journey for a consumer is important. How you deliver an omni-channel experience, an optimal engagement experience is for you to consider. Yeah. Can you provide I'll just answer this question for quickly. Can you provide a practical example of utilizing AI for campaign analysis? Yes, right? You could say that the fact that today, either two ways. Number one, either you can use ChatGPT or any other forms of analytical platform, right? Language model platform to analyze, right? That means you could feed in an Excel sheet and then they will start to analyze those numbers for you. Or you could use Power BI, right? There are other platforms out there in the market that has got algorithms for you to build to look at how you can predict information, right? Predict responses. Look at certain statistical analysis, whether it's cluster analysis or regressional, right? In that sense, to look at how you predict. Yes, right? So there are many ways and angles for you to look at it. Otherwise, you can always use the platform that's ready. For example, like I said so just now, right, Kay, is about Google Analytics. I believe one of the functions of Google Analytics is to look at the traffic analysis, because if you allow your website to be tagged under GA4, it gives you the option for them to analyze and look at specifically predictively, right? What are the some of the prescribed actions that you can do for your website to enhance, right? So these are some of it. Okay. Okay. Exploring emerging advertising platforms for better reach. I mean, many of us are familiar, right? We are familiar with what we know, and we run the risk of not understanding the full potential if we don't explore another platform, right? We have to admit the fact that today, when we look at purely YouTube, it's not as helpful. It can be helpful, but the reality is maybe because you are limiting yourself to what the potential is. And precisely because of what AI has to offer and what digital marketing or digital advertising has to offer, all the more we need to use AI to be able to touch base, because what it means is it is going beyond our own limiting beliefs. We are exploring what AI has to offer and tapping into possibilities, right? We must admit one thing. We are limited by our own experience. And therefore, our decision that we make is often prejudiced and biased by our own experience. But because we haven't tried it before doesn't mean that it doesn't work. The only thing is whether or not you are intelligent enough to be able to get some information or with the help of AI to explore the possibilities. And I think it's worth exploring, considering the fact that its capabilities, and there are many advertisers who have done it already. So clearly it's something for you to explore. Good. So what does this mean? Does this mean that traditional platforms are no longer what we call as no longer valid? Not true. They're not irrelevant. They're still relevant in many sense. Why? Simply because it's still a broader reach. And you can see even for digital platforms, they have actually looking at specifically the demographic, right? Looking at demographic factors for those who are new and wanting to learn new doesn't mean that they have not been exposed. They can be exposed to your ads through TV, right? Okay. Building brand trust and credibility. Okay. Now, when we talk about building brand trust and credibility, you must understand traditionally media how it's being set up. How it's being set up is clearly because as before you become an advertising, in the past, it requires a fair bit of investment. In terms of advertising, you needed to have a bank backing, you needed to have a certain amount of credibility, credit. You need to have that. You need to be established as a sound advertiser before you come on board. And this is important because of how it was being, or rather how advertisement is being bought through traditional means, it then reinforces the credibility. So that's why you will not go wrong in that sense. Because today, in terms of advertising on digital platform, there is no credit checks. There is no flexibility to say that today, whether or not today you are genuine advertising or not, advertiser or not. No. So it requires a lot of in-face and in-person, right? And that's what reinforces the authenticity of what you offer as a product. Okay. Seasonal event base, right? There is still the aspect of how today seasonally there's still going to be road shows. And I mean, like I said, it has to be very relevant. You need to do a bit of background with regards to the search. When you decide to run an event, you might have to consider using AI to determine what is the profile of the audiences in that vicinity, in that area, before you go down and run a road show, right? It makes sense for you to actually look into that. But the premise of this is very clear. It's about today how the awareness is still and can be reliable if it's proliferated through relevant channels, right? So it's really about how you actually have a combination, a mix of the right marketing mix. That's the idea, right? The right marketing channels, the right marketing technology. And what better way for you to be informed is only if you use information to help you to back it up. Okay? Okay. And I mean, this is pretty much the reason why cultural, local relevance is important, right? Predominantly, if you look at the aging population, increasingly the TV would be a form of engagement and content consumption for the older generation folks. So this is something to consider, right? Yeah. So quickly to recap before we wrap up for the day. So what are some of the key takeaways for digital advertising? Some of the key takeaways is really about understanding your digital audience, right? You must know your digital audience media consumption habits, right? And you need to be aware in terms of what the advertising costs and investment are, right? So you have information at your fingertips, so you make an informed decision. Someone asked the question about what are the top 3 DSPs in Singapore. Actually, to be honest, the top 3 DSPs is determined by the amount of investment, right? I mean, predominantly as an advertiser, there are many DSPs that they use simply because there's a lot of learning that involved, and there's a lot of what we call as retained learning information. Because when you use a DSP, there is a collection of data points in terms of how you have gained momentum, how you have gained optimizing proficiency, right? With your how your campaigns are being run efficiently. It's the same with Google. It's the same with Facebook. When you start a campaign, it's starting to collect the information. And it only makes sense that you stay with that. So that's why if you ask me, top 3 is really largely determined by spends. And usually big boys with deep advertising pockets will go for those. With those who are smaller budgets, you may not have the potential to be able to access those. So you generally kind of go to larger exchanges and platforms instead, the likes of Google platform, right? Google Ad Manager, Singapore Media Exchange. These are who you actually kind of go into. Yeah. When should we tap on digital marketing advertising? Now, I mean, the idea of Google, the idea of digital marketing advertising, when you should tap. If you ask me, now should be the time. If not, it should be 2 years ago, if not 3 years ago. Simply because, you know why? Because of the fact that today, with the likes of COVID, everybody's competitive advantage and the ground that they have actually accumulated, the advantage on the ground has actually reduced to level playing field. All right. So long as you start looking at digital advertising and marketing, you're never too late. But the fact that when you are not looking into it, you're leaving money on the table. Yeah, you're actually leaving money on the table. That means people who have knowledge and expertise in digital advertising and using and leveraging on AI to advertise is way ahead of you and taking advantage of the situation. When you're not taking advantage, it's not that you are losing out. It's more about your ability to potentially maximize your ROI is limited. Okay? In some sense, you may say there is a disadvantage. In some sense, you may say that it's not. But the truth is, if you don't tap into digital, you don't tap into AI, you can never leverage on the digital opportunity it offers for you. Yeah, can leverage on advertising technology enhance the efficacy of achieving optimal ROAS. Adopting AI makes a big difference. Okay, so some of the qualitative ad strategies, again, these are fundamental ad strategies that everyone should be looking at if you don't know already. Is about knowing what AIDA means. AIDA means awareness, interest, desire, action. These are the 4 stages in marketing. The fundamental we should never go. And this applies in digital marketing as well. A lot of people don't realize. And the same goes for advertising. For advertising at the different funnels, it means different content. It means different context when you're having a conversation. And that's the reason why these fundamentals will never go away. You still need to practice them, right? Custom audiences, be specific in terms of targeting, never be generic. If you're just only relying on demography to advertise, you are not leveraging on technology, right? You need to look at specific audiences, as minute, as detailed as possible, as specific as possible. The narrower you are, the better it is for your ROI. And also the better it is in terms of you reducing wastage in advertising dollars. Yeah, so remember that. Okay, broad audiences. Okay, I mean, if you want to go broad audiences, it's more really about brand awareness. For example, if you are there trying to get people to know about your brand, the values that you hold, then of course you can do broad advertising. But if you want to talk about ROI in terms of performance and ROAS, you should be specifically looking at narrow audiences. And only when you get success cases, then you double down your money to actually scale up, right? That's the idea. Okay, as I can say so, and I have told you so, narrow audience might cost more per click, but it leads to a higher conversion rate, which means it offers better value for the money. That's the idea. Okay, ad format, always look at a multitude of ad formats to begin with, and then narrow down to those that's working for you the best. Those that doesn't work, don't go into it. Ad frequency, remember, because of how the attention span and attention fatigue, or the short attention span that consumers have, advertising frequency needs to be managed and watched carefully. If you don't, you're wasting money. Okay, that's the idea. All right. Duration. Okay, when we run ad duration, there's a minimum time for you to run. And what we call as there should be at least 50 optimization events that happens in a week for it to truthfully, because the idea here is if you run an ad and it's optimized once, the first optimization itself doesn't have enough impact to deliver value and deliver a higher ROI. So there's certain volume that needs to be considered, right? The same in terms of advertising dollars for you to be able to optimize your ads. Just because you put in $100 and you try to get results as much as you can, it may not give you the optimal ability. You need to minimize, you need to spend perhaps maybe between 500 to 1,000 to start with to look at something that is worth optimizing first before you scale up to 1,000 to 3,000 to 5,000. Remember, always step from that perspective. Yeah. So in terms of good rule of advertising spend to start with, if you are on your own, right, a good rule of thumb to start with is 1,000, and you spend $1,000 within the month if it's possible. That's a good rule of thumb to start with. If you are, of course, working with an agency, you probably need a bigger budget. If you are looking at an exchange where the reach is bigger, you probably need to spend higher, right? But like I said, if you're looking at a platform, an open exchange platform, DSP platform, there's a minimum spend of between $3,000 to $5,000, right? And I think that is decent in terms of the revenue if you're expecting to take back. Okay. Can okay. Take in consideration the peak and off-peak hours, right? Establish performance goals. Remember, every marketing person, marketer out there will have a goal that you need to establish. There must be goals for you to understand how far or how close you are with reaching your goals. Okay. And the other things will be some of the strategies they have in place. I realize now it's close 4 minutes before we end the session. Maybe I will attend to some of the questions right now. Okay. You will have access to this. Remember to sign up, right? And you will get access, and I'll attend to some of the questions. Thank you so much. Okay. I'll try to get to some of the questions that I haven't answered. Okay. I'll start with the the recent few first. Okay, and for the first few, if I haven't got a chance to answer, apologies. I will get the team to record down this conversation so that we can maybe address the questions. For example, what do 50 optimization events means? It means to say that every time when you optimize, whether you're trying to find out which is the best performing channel or best performing ad, you are reducing and you are cutting down the wastage. That's called an optimized event. If you're running 10 ads and you notice that 4 ads is doing better than the other rest of the 6 ads, then that's called optimization. You actually narrow down. So it's called optimization. That's what we call 50 optimization events. Yeah. Okay. Could you share about 4As in advertising too? I don't know what you want to share about 4As. Basically, they're an association, right, that actually kind of governs the advertising standards, the ethical standards in terms of advertising. And usually what happens is for someone to be an accredited member, to have a license to help you to manage media, they need to be a member, right, along those lines. Yeah. Okay, the link is now available in chat. If you want to download, please feel free to download. In fact, at the end of this deck, there is a lot more information about social media. If you're interested, please access it because there's a lot more insights that I'd like to share with you, right? What else? Do you know the ad spend difference between 2033, 24, and 25? How much up and down, and what's your professional estimation? Um, Unfortunately, Joanne Fu, I don't have that information. But if you look at it progressively, right? If I look at it okay, let's say, no, not 5 years, in 2018, between 2018 and now, that's close about 7 years. Okay, 2020, about 6 to 7 years, 6 years, right? Largely, the advertising revenue in the market was around 1.6 B Singapore dollars. Today, it's gone up to 2.3. So with that, you can ask yourself really what is the growth actually is, right? If I'm not wrong, I think year on year, it's hovering between 1 to 2%, right? And I think in the last 2 years alone, with the introduction and the proliferation of AI, I'm very clear the numbers could have actually doubled. That is for sure. Yeah. Ken? Okay. With this, I thank you for your time and spending these 2 hours with me. I appreciate your attention. I hope you guys were informed and had enough information to help you with specifically. Yeah. With this, I maybe hand the session back to our organizers of National Library, right? And to close the session for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodney. And thank you everyone for being such a great audience today. It's a very interactive and active session, so thank you very much. We are about to end our program, so let me just share with you quickly just some resources, NLB resources. So if you have not, please do download our NLB mobile app to discover more of our offering when it comes to e-books, e-newspaper, e-magazine, NLP programs, and many more. You can find this app both in the Apple Store as well as Google Play Store. As for our book recommendation, one of them is Get Scrappy. So this book is more about digital marketing to help develop marketing plan for your businesses of any size. So you can learn to develop a plan and build your brand. So you can either scan the QR code here, or you also can click on the link that I just put up in the chat. I'll just leave this here maybe for 10 seconds. Our next one will be Marketing 4.0, moving from traditional to digital. So customers have changed, and are you ahead of the curve? This title explores how you can navigate the digital landscape and more effectively to reach the customers. So same thing, you can click on the link that I put out in the chat, or you can also scan the QR code. I'll give it to you for 10 seconds. And if you have not part of our mailing list yet, please do scan the QR code or click on the link and then join us in our mailing list. And lastly, your feedbacks are very important to us. So please do help us improve. Please provide us your feedbacks. Also, same thing, you can either scan the QR code or you can also click. Okay, so with that said, thank you very much, everyone. I'll be closing the session soon. And thank you very much, Mr. Rodney, for your informative information. Thank you, thank you. And also thank you, everyone, for joining today. Despite a very good weather, it was nice to see a very high turnout today, actually. So thank you very much. Good night. Happy holidays. Take care. Good night.
恭喜发财, everybody. Happy New Year. Wish you guys a prosperous and blessed New Year. Take care.